So once again, welcome to Is Data Boring or Radioactive? Thank you for joining us today. My name is Fernanda Correa, and I'll be helping out with the webinar today. We hope you get a lot of value out of the session and enjoy the content, whether you're watching this live or on demand. So before I pass it over to our speakers today, I have a quick poll to run to help us understand your relationship with data. So just stop sharing for a minute and we'll go to the poll. So we want to understand, what is your relationship with data? Executive, analyst, or policy, IT and technology, data management, or business reporting? We're getting some votes there. Other, yes, please feel free to share here in the chat if you couldn't find any options here. Just gonna give it a, still have some votes coming up. A few more seconds. Okay. So we have 60% analyst and policy, and in second place, we have data management and business reporting. Okay, that's awesome. Thank you so much. And if you didn't find any, if any of those apply to you, feel free to share here in the chat. Okay, so to help us rethink data, we have Jen Schellinck. She's CEO of Cisabi, an Ottawa-based data science and consulting company. She's also an adjunct professor in the cognitive science department at Carleton University, where she participates in basic AI research. Her company leverages artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science techniques to help organizations achieve their greater potential. For each project, she provides clients with a clear path towards attaining their data support goals through consulting, workshops, and data solutions. A current focus is on using digital twins to support climate action decisions. Her clients include government departments, not-for-profits, and businesses. Talking to Jen, we have Nilufer Erdebil, founder and CEO of Spring to Innovation. Nilufer is a TEDx Ottawa speaker and the author of the international best-selling book, Future-Proofing by Design. She has dedicated her career to helping organizations achieve remarkable advancements through design thinking principles. So with that, I'll pass it over to Nilufer to start the conversation with Jen. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fernanda. Welcome, Jen. So happy to have you here.
I'm just excited to be here.
We have known each other for a number of years now, and we've gotten a chance to work on at least one project where data and data systems were in place and part of the initiative as well, too. And so I want to go back to the title of our webinar. Is data boring or is it radioactive?
So I think it depends on your perspective, not surprisingly. And it makes me want to talk to people about their attitude towards data, because in a way, I think asking that question, it sounds like we're asking that question about the data, but really that is the question that we're asking about the people who work with the data. So I was interested to see in the poll how people are identifying in terms of their relationship with the data. And I would say that the reality is that for some people, data is the last thing they want to think about, right? They're like, oh, it's that messy stuff over there. It's sort of hiding behind the scenes. do we, like, it kind of gets produced almost out of thin air, but do we really need to worry about it? Whereas for other people, it's a major focus of their job or their life. And for them, sometimes they get very concerned about it. They get very concerned about the potential uses of it, what it can do, its power. And so for them, they sort of think about it as this radioactive substance. So really, it's the data is the data, and then it's how you approach it that, are you going to find it boring or radioactive? Yeah.
And how do you encourage people to reframe how they think about data? Because it's not that we want people to think it's boring or radioactive. It's somewhere in the middle there, because there's so much information there that we can synthesize into knowledge and to help us out with decision making. But how do you help people reframe data?
So I do think I'm a big fan of the power of analogy in helping people with this. I think, I was saying that data sort of, it's almost like it sort of just materializes somehow. We're always sort of awash in new data. At least in my life, new data is always appearing. But it's in some ways, it's a little bit invisible, a little bit abstract, a little bit intangible. And so for me, I like to use analogies to help people reframe how they think about it. And I find that the analogy that works best is sort of unique to each person as well. Like, there are a few key analogies, which I'll get into in just a minute, but I think the important thing is choosing the analogy that resonates with you to help you find data either less boring or less radioactive. So for example, one of the analogies we do hear a lot about is, people talk about data is the new oil, for example.
Yes.
That's a very popular analogy. And I think there's a lot of value in that analogy, because it gets at this idea that data can be a fuel to do things. Right. Yes. So if you think about data as a fuel, as oil, as a fuel, then that can be a powerful motivator for you if you like this idea of data as like feeding into an AI engine, right? Like that yes. term goes perfectly with this idea of like, data is the oil, you have the AI engine, you feed in the data, and then your engine has power. And so for some people, like, that's a really appealing way to think about data. It motivates them to think, well, how can I extract the data and get it into the engine and things like that. So that's great for those folks who have that kind of perspective. For some people, I like to talk about data as like a baking ingredient, in fact, because again, all of these analogies have this theme of it's a material of some sort. But it's nice to think about it as kind of like, it's like your raw baking material, like, flour or sugar, and you have it there, and then you can look at it and sort of think, what cool things can I bake up with my data, right? So you're kind of, it's motivating you to be creative. There's a sense of discovery and many different possibilities. And so, for some people, like, that's the analogy that resonates with them. So you can there's a number of possibilities. And so you can kind of pick the one that makes you feel like, oh, this is actually fun, not boring, or, oh, this is manageable and it's not this sort of messy, dangerous, radioactive substance over here. So that's what I would say. That's a way to sort of help shape your relationship in a positive way.
Oh, I like that. And you touched on something quite briefly, the fact that data is required for AI and LLMs, large learning models. And and it's a super hot topic for many of our clients as well right now. What are some common challenges that you're hearing around data for AI and LLMs?
Well, so one of the things that I'm seeing happening is that now people are realizing that their data has value.
Yeah.
So I think, those of us who have been in the data world we knew that, but now it's become, this is a really strong use case for, oh my gosh, we can do these powerful things with our data. And so one of the challenges people are running into now is that they have maybe a little bit of catch up to do in terms of things like the structures that are holding their data, or the models and the organization of their data, because they kind of need to have that in place in order to take advantage of these new tools and techniques. I can get into some more specific detail about how the different ways that you can take advantage of the techniques with the data, but I don't want to get too weedy if that's not where we're at right now.
I have tons of questions for you because there's so much, I think, need for data, and it's really relevant right now, but there's also so much fear around data as well too. And so I wanted to ask you, what are some simple actions people can take to start rethinking their relationship with data?
Yes, so there are definitely some steps. The first one is that analogy piece. So, step one really is to sort of say, what is an analogy I can use to help me feel positive about data and help me sort of get a handhold on to it. So step one, maybe people here have already done this now that we've been offering analogies to them. So pick a good analogy. I will also say that that's helpful if you're already a data practitioner and you're already quite comfortable with data, as I think some of the people here are. That analogy is useful for you to communicate to other people. So it's really powerful to have the analogy that you've thought about, how it relates to your work, that you can then use to communicate to other people. So I would say that is step one. Step two would be, and I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna expand on this after I say it out, is to take stock. Okay, but when I say that, sometimes this stresses people out because they think, oh my gosh, like often people have this is going to be a theme that comes back. They have a lot of emotions attached to their data, right? And sometimes people feel like embarrassed about the state of their data. They feel stressed about it. And so it's like your sock drawer where you're kind of like, I don't want to look at my sock drawer. I don't want to think about that. So when I say take stock, I'm saying this at a high level, at a conceptual level. I don't mean that you have to immediately go digging around in the equivalent of your sock drawer. I just mean that at a high level, you can think about, what ingredients do I have, right? So like just in a conceptual way, you can be like, do I have flour? Do I have sugar? So analogously, like what types of data does my organization have? So just, you can do a little like high level taking stock, and that kind of reduces the stress a little bit. It can be a little bit of a paper exercise, but it gets you moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I love that. And I think sometimes people feel like their data is not in the condition that they wanted to, but as with the work that you and I have done, we found that actually they did have the data that they needed and the quality that they needed. And so sometimes it really helps to have in and bring in a data specialist to take a look at your systems and the data that you have, and we can certainly help out to understand what type of data that you need and how people are inputting data into the system as well too.
Yeah, you can kind of do that. What's your landscape, and help surface some of that. Absolutely. And actually, that's a perfect lead into my third simple action, which is pick someone to be the data champion.
Yeah.
Right. And so that doesn't have to be you. I think that's the important thing is like, if you're realistic with yourself and you're like, I don't really want to be that person, that's okay. But somebody in your organization should be that person, and you should know who they are. So that would be like another simple step that people can take to sort of reframe and maybe improve their relationship with data a little bit.
That's a good one. My next question for you is, how can data help us better empathize with people and reframe problems and push organizations towards new perspectives? Because this is a lot of what design thinking is about, is that empathizing, reframing, and pushing our organizations to new perspectives.
Yes. Okay, so this question kind of strikes at the heart of what data is, I think. Data, or what its fundamental power is. So data increases our understanding of something.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, that if we use it, that's what it does. And I'm going to go into a few little details about how it does that. But hopefully, when I say that, it makes the connection to those parts of your question clearer, because one of the most important things I think when you want to empathize with someone is you have to put yourself in their shoes. You have to understand them. And so data can help you do that. And similarly with the projects, with the perspectives, fundamentally, it's going to help you with the understanding. Now, do you want me to get a little bit more into kind of like the process, I guess you could say? So to me, I like to, this is a very common way to kind of think about the progression of going from data to information to knowledge. And it's that knowledge piece, again, from an empathy point of view, from a perspective taking point of view, it's the knowledge piece that we need to get to, right? And so it's kind of this process of refining. So the data is very raw. It's all these specific little like micro facts, you could say. And so then what you need to do is you kind of compress that, you work with it, and it turns into knowledge or information, which is like facts. And then there's this sort of transformative process where you take those facts and you kind of ingest them and get them into your head. And then that's where you get that knowledge to move forward. So to me, I see it as that process that leads you into this more empathetic and understanding place.
And it does help us reframe the problems too, because sometimes what we think is happening isn't actually happening and something different is happening. And so I always think of it as another perspective to bring in there. And often people don't think they have very much data, but it might not be your team or your organization collecting that data, but there's a lot of data out there.
Oh, yes. And I think that's an important point, is that you often have both more data than you think. And increasingly, we're finding more and more ways to turn more and more things into usable data. So there's that piece. But as you say, even a small amount of data, if there's a key insight in that data, right, that can be very, very powerful. So it's not always about, oh, we need giant, vast reams of data to get somewhere useful or important.
Yeah. And I know you chatted a little bit about it, but I wanted to know your perspective on how human factors shape the way we work with data.
Yeah, this is important. And so again, I love that you're bringing out the sort of human aspect of it. I would expect nothing less. So human factors. So how do we impact the data and the data analysis? The way I like to think about this is, if I have a data set and I analyze it and you analyze it, are we going to come up with something different? Because the data set's the same. So what's differing there are the human factors between the two of us. Yeah. And I'm going to say that often people who work with data feel really uneasy. I've said this to folks before, because they want to think of it as an objective process, right? They want to just be like, well, there's just a truth in the data, and I would find that truth and you would find that truth, and there's no human factors involved. But I think I'm looking at you and we're like, oh yeah, no, there's there's human factors. And so the human factors there are, all of the decisions that we make when we interact with the data set, when we decide which parts of that data we're going to pay attention to, the questions we're going to ask of that data set, the techniques we're going to gravitate towards, the tools that we know how to use versus the tools that someone else knows how to use. All of these things combine to mean that we're going to get different things out of that data set. So to me, those are some of the human factors involved.
Yeah, and like you were mentioning before with the data, as you go from the data to information, it's when you go from information to knowledge that there's different perspectives that are being brought in, and almost biases as well too.
Yeah, and those biases, like they come in all of the different places, really. Bias is a very loaded word, but in a way it just means the perspective that you bring to it, what you're seeing versus what you're not seeing, and it's going to be different in different places. Yeah.
So with that being said, how can people use data proactively to support decision making or for decision support?
Okay, so this is a big topic, and full disclosure, I teach a course on this. So I mean, I could go on at some length. So stop me if I'm
Okay.
rambling on. But okay, so data for decision support. So the first thing I would say is that the nice thing about data is that you can use it in 3 different time frames. Okay, so you can use it in terms of like what has happened in the past. You can use it to think about what is happening now around us. And then, not surprisingly, you can use it to consider what you can. I'd split this into 2 things. You can think about what will actually happen in the future, like I think there's a chance that this will happen, but you can also use it to think about like future possibilities or possible worlds. So there's those 3 time frames that you can work with. And then when you cross that with decision making, that's where each different time frame is relevant to the decision making process, right? So with data, you can use data to learn about cause and effect relationships from the past, and you can use that to help you make your decisions in terms of, oh, okay, that's what happened in the past, it could happen again, I have to be aware of this when I'm making my decision. So that's one way. Situational awareness, really important. And so you can use data to help you know what's going on around you. Why is this important? Because you don't always know if you have to make a decision.
Yeah.
Like you need to be aware of what's happening to know, this is actually a moment that I need to be making a decision. So from that point of view, it's really, really important to be using data to help you understand what's happening so that you can intervene at the right moment to make the good decisions. And then the last piece of it is, and this is, I think this is the piece that people often think about when they think about data and decision making, is that future piece where you can kind of say, okay, I'm going to use my data, I'm going to do analysis, to do projections, to do forecasting. So I can say, this is one possible thing that could happen in the future. This is another possible thing. And I want this one to happen. So I'm going to make decisions to lead to that happening. So, I mean, I could talk more, but that's just,
I love that.
that's just a little bit.
Another area of what you're just saying that I'm super passionate about with data too is the data from the past, the current, and then the future. It allows you to do a trend analysis to understand how people, it might be how people are behaving, if it's data on people, or how systems are doing, how much is being purchased or procured, depends on what the data is, but understanding that trend in terms of how it's shifting over time so that you can make decisions based on that trend and on that trajectory, as opposed to here's what's happening today or here's what happened in the last year. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right decision to make, and it's not the right data for a decision to be made.
I like that. I think that's a nice piece to put in there. There's that sort of dynamic aspect, like where are we actively headed now, and how do we take that into consideration? Yeah.
I know a lot of consumer businesses use data to understand how their customers are shifting in their behavior to come up with new products, new services, and also to basically figure out whether or not it's worthwhile to continue with some of the products and services that they do have. And data is vital for that. Are you getting the cost benefit as you move forward? Are the clients still there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually in some ways, a new capability for us, sort of as data practitioners, because it's increasingly possible to work with data and do the analysis in real time. So now it is possible, as you say, to sort of see these trends happening in real time, see things changing in real time, and be responsive to that. I think that's like really different from even not that long ago. Traditionally, a lot of data analysis happened in a scientific academic context. And that was very much about like, we want to find these kind of, universal truths that are not going to change. And that to me is one of the big changes in terms of how we think about data and work with data, is that we're sort of like saying, well, yeah, that's a great one possible use of it, but now we can do it more immediately, dynamically, and with respect to very specific situations.
Yeah, and I think that's where fear comes in once again as well too. I know for myself, I had a lot of fear when I first started working with data because you don't necessarily know what's behind it. And so I think a level of comfort can be achieved as people understand what's behind it. I did some SQL queries in the past. For those that aren't as familiar, it's basically getting information in an automated way from a database. And so once I realized how simple it was on the back end, it made it a lot less intimidating to use the data and then to also be able to make sense of the data as well too. That being said, in your experience, why do people tend to focus more on the tools and technologies rather than in meaning and the relevance behind the data?
Yeah, this is absolutely a thing, right? I definitely see people doing this where they're like, I got this tool, I got this tool. And then of course you have this question about like, okay, but what's your data saying? What is behind it? I think so I've thought about this a bit, and I think there's a few things going on. One of those I think is just that the tool is shiny. Like it's designed to be appealing and attractive to people, and it pulls them towards the tool. I think, I was saying at the start of the webinar that data can be a little behind the scenes, like a little hard to engage with, a little invisible. That's like the opposite of kind of what people are doing with the tools, where they, practically have flashing lights saying, look at me, look at me, look at me. So there's this strong temptation to go in that direction. I think it's also very natural because people think about, okay, I have this project. What do I need for this project? And the tools are necessary, right? So they're both shiny, necessary, and they're designed for use by people. They're designed. I would contrast that with, so I often think of data as a material. I'm going to use another analogy here. Like, imagine you're building something out of wood, like a house. So the material, the wood in this case, it wasn't really initially designed for people, right? It grew there, and we're repurposing it.
Yes.
So it's actually, that's one of the reasons why we design the tools, is it's actually hard to just engage with the material itself directly. Whether it's you're building a house, or if in the case of data, it's hard to engage with it and really sort of think about, where did it come from? What is it like? So I think it's all of this to say, I think it's actually quite natural for people to gravitate towards the tool, as opposed to the data and its origin and what it's representing, because that's the part that is harder. Yeah.
So how do you help people avoid the shiny object syndrome?
Yeah. And I'll tell you one of my strategies. When I tell you, you're going to go, well, okay, well, that's an obvious strategy. But before I do that, I will say it is important to do this, because, and I probably don't have to sell this very hard to the folks who are listening, because I have seen projects fail because people gravitated towards the shiny tools without also thinking about the data piece. So it is really critical that you navigate this. My advice is to be aware of the temptation and work directly to avoid it. So, to say, yeah, we're going to be tempted to go to the tool for all the reasons I just said. But we just have to kind of be aware of that explicitly and make a concerted effort to make time to go to the data, to think about it, to see what its structure is, and just to carve out the space for that, being aware that the temptation is going to be naturally to do something different.
Yeah,
so
I love that. And we had a great comment in our chat, is that as we're bringing and taking a look at data and whether or not it might be biased, someone mentioned that there's other circumstances that might have played a role in how the data has changed as well too. And as an example they give, if there's a particular time when there was a rollout of a new device, like for new smartphones, and then that could have impacted the numbers and the number of purchases. And so it's really important, not just the data, but the context around the data too, as you were talking about. And those tools might be able to help you spot that, but they don't provide the reasoning behind it. And so you need the tool, the understanding of the data and the process in terms of how the data is getting there and the anomalies as well too.
And I think actually that brings up that another part that I often am encouraging people to think about, which is the world itself. Because the data is a representation of the world. And I will say that data scientists, myself included, tend to just want to dive into the data and not think about, and I think that this question about the context brings up that relationship between the data and the world. So you really do have to think about that piece as well. I can give you like a little concrete example from a workshop that I was doing. It's just a little teeny example, but I had them working with a data set about like traffic. And it was from an Ottawa open data portal. And they were working with it. And then one of the people brought up that in fact, it was an old data set, and since then they had changed the roads, and so probably like the traffic patterns were no longer current. And so how can we draw conclusions from this? So just a similar example, smartphone rollout, but it really put the point on like the world is dynamic and the data has to match up with the world, or you're not going to get to the right place, literally or figuratively, right?
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And for folks that are online, feel free to put some questions in the Q&A section. We'll get to those in a few minutes. I have so many questions for you, Jen. Maybe we can, so actually initially when we were thinking about doing this webinar, we were thinking about talking about the theory of data science. And then we shifted it to more having people understand data and how it's being used. Could you comment a little bit on how do you see the gap between theory and practice in data science and organizational data use?
Yeah. So I will also say, before I get into this, full disclosure, I'm very much a theory person. I feel like this is like, I feel guilty saying that, but I'm very much a theory person. So it's been really interesting for me to come from that kind of more like academic theory place, and then to do a wide variety of projects, you know, particularly in the government space, although in industry, not-for-profits as well, and really have to see how this plays out. And you know, how the rubber hits the road. So it's been an interesting experience. And I think one of the challenges has been that a lot of data science, it is coming from a theoretical space, which is kind of, I don't know if that's how you also see it a little bit.
I don't see it that way as much because I was so involved in the application of it in products. But I so respect that perspective.
Well, and this is, that's why I wanted to check in with you, because the funny thing is, even as I'm saying it's a theoretical, it comes from a sort of a theoretical space, I will say that the discipline itself, the domain itself of data science, was created out of a desire to take those theoretical techniques and apply them concretely. So it should be applied, like data science should be an applied discipline. But particularly in its early days, and I've been involved with it since its early days, it does tend to pull people from this more sort of, you know, statistical computer science theory space. And so I think there can be challenges, not just in the techniques themselves, but the people carrying out the techniques who come into these more practical spaces, and then they're kind of like, but how does the theory work, and how does the statistical, like what are the statistical assumptions that are happening here? And usually the people in the organization are kind of like, we don't know. You're the data scientist, right? You know, you're the one that needs to bring that practical lens to the space as well. So I do think it's been my first answer to that is, it's sometimes work has to happen during the project to really get that tight fit between maybe the more abstract data science techniques and the actual world problem that is being addressed.
Yeah. Yeah, applying it to the real world. We had a great comment too that open data is a great way to inform and educate people.
Yes. Yeah. Open data is it's great. I feel like these days I really want to encourage people to renew their enthusiasm about open data. Because like the City of Ottawa data portal, for example, it has so much stuff on it that people have done a lot of work to put there and to make accessible. And so it's definitely it's a resource. Like we're talking about data as a resource, right? They're giving this resource away for free, which is pretty exciting. So you just have to go and take advantage of it. So that's a good comment on that front.
And do you see other municipalities around the world that have open data as well?
I think so. I mean, I think that there was a period of time about a decade ago when a lot of all levels of government, but certainly municipalities, kind of made a commitment to making their data more open and putting it out there. And so I think a lot of municipalities do have this commitment to doing it. I think it's time, you know, after a certain period of time, I think you need sort of a renewal and a renewed enthusiasm for that. So I'm kind of advocating, not just me, lots of open data people are advocating for like, okay, let's have a second wave of this and encourage municipalities and other levels of government to keep going on that front.
Love that. Can you tell us a little bit about your latest project and how digital twins fit into evolving data landscape, and maybe also describe what digital twins are for some of our audience that might not know?
Yes. Okay. So this is a perfect follow-up, I will say, to the question of open data, because one of the latest projects that I'm putting forward in my company is a digital service called VeritySim, which is focusing on using digital twins to support municipalities in carrying out climate action. A lot of municipalities are really conscious of the need for climate action, and they've made a lot of commitments on that front. And so to me, like just from a personal values place, I think that's really great, really important. So the VeritySim digital service is intended to support that through the use of digital twins and using open data sources to create those digital twins. So in terms of what a digital twin is, it had its origins in the manufacturing space, but I'm going to talk about it more broadly, as it's a high fidelity real-time simulation of another object. So that's like a big mouthful. But to give you a few examples, so you could have a digital twin of an airport, for example. And what that would be is, so you'd have the airport would be, you know, running along, doing its thing. And then the digital twin of the airport would be also running along at the same time, simulating what was going on in the airport. And the nice thing about this, talking about past, present, and future, is that the digital twin helps people have visibility on what is happening right now, letting them know, are there decisions that we should be making right now? Are there interventions that we should be making? And then also sort of saying, okay, but what's likely to, based on what we know right now through our simulation, what's going to happen next week? What's going to happen next month? Are there things that we should be thinking about preparing or maybe changing based on what it's telling us now? I will say Internet of Things is a big piece of that as well. As you might imagine, a lot of these digital twins really rely on sensors in the environment to feed into the real-time simulation of the object.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, one of our partners, Walter, just wrote in the chat that one of our pioneering cities with open data and citizen bottom-up participation is Barcelona. And I've seen some of the great work that they've done with IoT as well, too. And so thank you for that comment. Walter and I do a course on IoT and design thinking to help people better understand the technology and the human perspective of it. And so lots of great insights into data and IoT in that session too. Now, data has actually evolved. Data management has evolved. How have you seen the practice of data wrangling and management evolving over the past few years?
It's evolving. The pace is rapid. So the main thing I will talk about is the AI explosion and that kind of thing. I will say that before I get into that, broadly speaking, I have seen an acceleration of what I would call digital maturity over the last, I'm going to say 5 years. I do think that the pandemic had a role to play in that because suddenly we're all online. There was a requirement to kind of rapidly improve the IT infrastructure in a lot of organizations. There was a requirement for a lot of people to get more digitally savvy. So that did have an effect on the general level of digital maturity in organizations. So that did have an effect. However, on top of that, as we all know, there was the arrival of large language models, ChatGPT, and these have fundamentally and are fundamentally changing our relationship with data, our data practice, all of these pieces, as they're changing a lot of things. So we're 100% not immune from that overarching evolution. I would say that in terms of the data piece, a couple of things I could highlight would be just in terms of the ability to work with unstructured data, the ability to work with language data, the ability to engage with it in a much more semantic fashion. Semantic, I mean like not just like the letters themselves, but the meaning behind the letters. That's been just a huge change. So to the point where, I used to work with organizations and I would say, well, you've got your structured data and your unstructured data. And they'd go, oh yeah, we're not really worried about the unstructured data. Yeah, well, like let's just focus on the stuff in the database, right? Whereas now suddenly everybody wants to have a knowledge base. Everybody wants to say, okay, we've got all of our unstructured data, we're going to put in the knowledge base, we're going to work with it. So that's just one way that things have been evolving rapidly with respect to data practice.
I love that. We had a question in the chat, and then I'm going to get to the Q&A right after this too, is circling back on the accuracy of the different forecast part of the exercise with digital twins.
I think that's really important. As a simulation person, validation is always front and center for me. And I think that your question about that, I'm just taking a look at the question about the accuracy of different forecasts is absolutely essential, right? Because in machine learning in general, typically when you make a forecast or you make a guess, you don't just say, this thing is going to happen. You also say, with this level of confidence, or, with this probability, that kind of thing. So you're always wanting to qualify how certain you are. You want to have, usually it's best practice to have multiple models. So not just like, one, I say, digital twin, but as part of your digital twin, you have multiple predictors and you compare them. And then you're always wanting to validate your model with ground truth. So very, very important. Yes.
Love that. Thank you, Jen. So our first question from the Q&A, and feel free to put in more questions along the way. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. Do you think the loss of the human factor when storytelling with data using AI is a negative thing, or is it a necessary consequence of perhaps obtaining deeper insights into a particular data set?
So I'm just, there's a lot to unpack in this question. So I'm just going to take a quick look at it as well. So you bring up storytelling with data. And is losing the human factor a necessary consequence? So I think that I'm going to interpret your question. Hopefully I'm going to interpret it correctly. Coming at from a data science perspective, I often think of adding storytelling into the data as adding a human factor.
Yeah.
So, but I can also see how if you are used to, like, I think a lot of people in leadership roles, you know, they have to rely on their own experience, their own knowledge, their own perspective. And so from their perspective, you know, they would be going into it with a, like, I'm going to tell a story to move things forward. But now suddenly this weird data piece is coming in and I have to do data storytelling, and maybe I don't want to. I'm interpreting the question. So I think that, I think it's important to have a balance there. Like you have to let the data speak. You know, the data is going to say what it's going to say. And you want that to influence what people are saying. So in that sense, you want it to be more objective and less human driven. But if you just put out like an unnarrated, unannotated chart, it's not going to go very well either. So I think you really have to come to that like middle Goldilocks place when it comes to the human factor piece and the data piece.
Yeah, I find that human factor, that human perspective allows people to better understand the data too. And that storytelling aspect, I think people retain that information better. And so if it's relatable and they can remember it, it's even better for you as you're talking about data to clients or to senior executives as well.
I think it's really important. It really is this sort of hybrid approach. Yeah,
absolutely. Our next question is, what advice would you give to help data users be more aware and stay open-minded to what is not in our data? Comment around that is, I think it's easy to forget about what's missing and who's not represented in data that we're using to make a decision.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is so key. And I often see this happen where there can be a mismatch between the questions you want to answer and the data you actually have. And it is really tempting to just sort of say, well, they want to answer this question, we'll kind of try to answer it with this data. But I think this speaks to this being open-minded to what is not in our data. Yes. And just basically sort of saying like, there are some questions we cannot or should not try to answer in the absence of other data or in the absence of having this really important group represented in our data. And I think this often happens because a lot of the time we're trying to repurpose data from, you know, from one situation into another situation. And so maybe it made sense not to gather that data in that moment. But yeah, absolutely. You have to be aware that you can't exclude people just because you don't want to go back and collect the right data that would be about them. So yeah, great. So I don't know if that was giving advice. I'm not sure if I gave advice. I was more agreeing with that this is a really important thing. But yeah, I would say it's worth highlighting it with some examples to say, you know, if we try to answer this question with this data that doesn't have this piece, it's going to have this potential consequence.
I would say from a human-centric perspective and a design thinking perspective, that the advice that I would give to organizations is to, as you get that data and looking at whether or not people had been appropriately represented, make sure that you're doing a sanity check internally as well and thinking about the different types of customers that you might have and to see, are they represented in here? And especially if you're looking at some customers that you might not have, those would be future customers. And so how do you represent that in the data or in the synthesis of the data to provide you knowledge?
Yeah, that's very good advice. Yeah, absolutely.
And so thanks. Can you speak a bit about the downside of offering all that data? For example, as a city, if all water sources and infrastructure were offered, would that bring more risk to malicious use of the data as a target for malintent, or are there precautions that you might offer to mitigate some of that?
Yes, yes. So I think this is important because it brings up the power of data and the fact that it's not a neutral substance, right? I mean, this does come back to slightly the radioactive analogy. You know, radioactive material is very powerful, and you can use it to, use, medical imaging, and this is great, but it's also, it has side effects, it's problematic. So I think this is a really important thing to be aware of. And, you can see it in that data can be repurposed for really unexpected uses. It can also be used to kind of like micromanage things in a way which is perhaps not beneficial. So there's lots of ways that data can go awry. And so I do think that there is a tension, like coming back to the open data portals. I think one of the reasons we're kind of going through this like almost like second age of open data portals is that some of the awareness of what people can do with that data for good or bad is now kind of front of mind. So I think that I don't have like an immediate magical solution on how to navigate that, other than to say that, like, I'm increasingly speaking about the power of data and speaking to the fact that that power is not neutral. It can be used for good or bad. And so I think we can't be naive to that anymore. And we have to be conscious of that in specific use cases. How can this be used in a good way? How might it be used in a problematic fashion?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I think we could talk for days on this. I am passionate about data, and I know you're super passionate about data, but we're almost at time for our webinar. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or comments about the webinar. You'll get a survey in a little bit. One thing I want to mention before I pass it over to Fernanda is that our next webinar is going to be in a month, and we're shifting it up a little bit. The webinars are still free to participants and of our community that is in the Deeper Clarity LinkedIn network. So if you haven't signed up, you might want to sign up for that. And then for those that are not part of the community, we're going to be charging $25 for the webinars going forward. That being said, Fernanda, maybe I can pass it over to you. Jen, thank you so much for being with us and for the great conversation. I'm sure we'll run into each other again and continue this conversation.
My pleasure. And thanks to everybody else for such fantastic questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Nilufer. Yeah, great conversation. As always, we could be here for hours. There was a lot more questions to ask, but we're getting in time. So thank you all for joining us today. We hope you find it insightful, and we encourage you to keep exploring with our Deeper Clarity and join our LinkedIn network. The link is on the chat. For those of you that joined later or wish to revisit today's session, we will send out the recording in a week or so, and with any additional resources mentioned during the discussion. So keep an eye out in your email for that.
And remember, for the Deeper Clarity Network, it's a community. And so you guys can feel free to ask questions to one another or to us, and we'd be happy to be able to answer those questions with you.
Yeah, exactly. And also, just really quickly, for those that join a little bit later, we have some upcoming courses now in June. We have our advanced design thinking for those that completed our design thinking level 1 or our certification. We also have a workshop, Getting Aligned, setting projects up for success, which after many years of experience, we learned that it's so much important and it makes such a difference in the end when you start with alignment. And we also have the When AI Gets Physical, digital physical transformation, where we'll talk a little bit more about AI and IoT and design thinking. And this is with Walter Knittel that joined us here today as well. And if you want to do it on your own pace, we also have the Introduction to Design Thinking self-paced with video lessons that we have available in English and French. So all of those you can find on our website. You can check our calendar for the upcoming courses or get in contact if you want some customized ones for your team. We also, on our website, you also find the link to Nilufer's book, Future Proofing by Design, where she explores a little bit of design thinking, but with an emphasis on the public sector, with lots of examples and lots of her experience in some projects that she ran. Again, in the chat, you can find all the links to our website, our YouTube channel, our network. Please join, and it's a great space for you to get all your questions answered, to chat and share experiences there. And please leave us, as we're talking about data, please answer our survey. We'd love to hear from you. It's very important for us to understand what kind of topics you would like to see. If you have any suggestions of guest speakers that you would love to see here, we would love to hear it. And thank you so much for joining us. And I hope everyone has a great end of your day.
Bye, everyone.